When you do checkmate, you don't kill the king. You just put him in the corner. He lost his honor, and honor is more important to Iranians than life. He's 86, he's not healthy, he's not young. I think he's a little bit demented.
So better then to kill the regime than to kill the leader.
Iran is not an enemy of Israel. Iran and Israel have a common enemy named the Islamic Republic. After the next revolution, maybe Iran will be the most secular country in the Middle East. There's a lot of fear among Iranians from the West becoming Islamic. It's the second biggest Jewish community in the Middle East. They are hostages of the regime. You don't have the option to say no. So the only prayer house that was full of people protesting against Israel and supporting Hamas was a synagogue. In October, there were over 160 executions. The pilot from the first wave of attacks said that when they approached Iran, they saw Iranian fighter jets taking off and running away.
Isn't there a risk, though, in that sense, that if the regime doesn't fall, what you're left with is actually a lot of neophytes, people who really don't have a clue what they're doing?
What brings people to the streets is authentic rage. The Iranian people are our allies, not our tools. We need a psychologist.
I'm Jonathan Sacerdoti. Dr. Tamar Eilam Gindin. We're talking in this moment of war between Israel and Iran. We're on day 5 when we're recording this. And I want to know, is Israel going to kill Khamenei?
I don't know if they're going to kill Khamenei. I know there's been talk about it, and I think it would be a grave mistake.
Why do you think that would be a mistake?
Right now, Khamenei is in the worst position possible. He lost his honor, and honor is more important to Iranians than life. If we kill him now, we make him shahid. We make him a martyr, so he will get to his aspiration, because they all say we want to die as shahids. Israel just made dreams of a lot of people come true when they made them shaheeds in the past few days. And a shaheed also becomes sort of a legend. And instead of leaving a legacy of ruining Iran, it will also be this legacy. But among some of the people, he will rise to a legend, like what happened to Raisi, who was the worst president possible. But because he died, and I don't know why they made him shaheed, but they did, some people are now, referring to him as a martyr and as a legend. If we let him live with this disgrace, it's much worse. Another thing, I'll talk about the disgrace also later, but if he dies now, he's 86. He has prostate cancer for a long time. He's not healthy. He's not young. I think he's a little bit demented because of the things he said in the past few months that caused this escalation. He could have taken another path that could have made him survive, maybe with less honor. They usually play with words and do copywriting tricks to convince the people that we're not giving up our honor. But what he said in the past few months is what brought him to this situation. And if he dies and the Islamic Republic still works, the Council of Experts will just replace him by another person who might be younger, more vigorous, more clear in the head, and that might save the Islamic Republic. What we can do now is, when we leave him in disgrace, do you know The Princess Bride? When Prince Humperdinck says to the death, Wesley says no, to the pain. So this is what we're doing to him, and I'm sure that after the people rise and change the regime, he could face an end like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, and that would be historically, it would be a much bigger victory for Israel, for Iran, for
the world.
For the world.
So better then, to summarize that, to kill the regime than to kill the leader.
Yes. We need to do, checkmate. When you do checkmate, you don't kill the king. You just put him in the corner. The next step would have been killing him, but you don't do it.
Of course, the connections with Persians and chess are well known. So interesting that you said you think he has signs of dementia, because in a way, I think we can perhaps see some differences between how we in the West do things and how the Persians do.
I say he has dementia because I think he did stupid things. I don't know his medical records, and I don't know if he forgets things. Or
listen, that's how it was with Joe Biden. So I think that the question I was going to ask is, how much does it matter that the supreme leader has these problems? Because it's different, really, from a president of the US. There was a machine that kind of, we assume, took over. I don't know if it's dementia in Biden's case, but there's a lot of talk about who was really running the country. But with the supreme leader, isn't the clue in the name?
The supreme leader is the supreme leader. He's in charge of everything. He's the commander of all the armed forces. He's the commander. He's the one who nominates the committee that screens candidates for all the elections. He nominates personally the head of judiciary, and together they nominate the constitutional guard. That is the one that really decides what happens. Screens the candidates and approves or disapproves laws. So everything comes down to him. I assume he's also surrounded by, he has advisors. I don't know if they're advisors who advise him and then he makes the decisions, or if there's a group that really runs him, because he is, as I said, 86.
So in the circumstances that we're in, is, in your opinion, the regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, going to fall?
It's not academic of me and it's not professional, but I am very optimistic. There've never been in a situation this bad. And I could have said it in December too. In December, when they lost their whole proxy array that they invested so much in the past few decades. They invested more than $80 billion just in Syria. And they lost all their proxies. Their proxies, Hezbollah and Syria and Hamas and the others, especially Hezbollah, was not only a ring of fire around Israel, but it was also a source of reserve soldiers to help suppress the protests, because there are not enough Iranians who are willing to hit other Iranians in the streets. And from 2009, I've been hearing this. Personal friends who were in the 2009 protests, and in social media, there were a lot of reports from 2019, and there was a leaked document from 2022 that Nasrallah sent thousands of Lebanese soldiers to help the regime suppress the protests. So now they don't have it. So from December 8th, I can really pinpoint the date, the regime started to be much more careful with the people. December 8th is the date when users, I don't say people because in social media, we don't know who's a person and who's just a bot, but users who support the regime started saying the most important asset of Iran is the people, or of the Islamic Republic is the Iranian people. And other users were like, so why are you shooting us in the streets? Why didn't you say so in 2022 and in 2023 and in 2019? And they also brought specific names of protesters who were killed. So they started saying that the people are an asset. There was supposed to be a new draconic hijab law that was supposed to take effect December 13th, and they canceled it. The Supreme Council of National Security told the parliament, you are not implementing this law because people will go to the streets. It will be impossible to enforce, and people will go to the streets, and we don't have the power to suppress it now.
What was the change they were going to make with hijab?
It was supposed to be from the age of 12 instead of 15. It was supposed to be a longer, up to 15 years in prison, a bigger fine, more whiplashes. Whiplashes?
Whipping, yeah, just to be
More
clear. So just for people who don't know, what is the current hijab law, and what's the punishment, and how well is it enforced?
I'm not sure, but the new hijab law was also supposed to include whipping is a normal punishment. Every crime you do has a fine, whipping, and incarceration.
And possibly death.
Yes. So what was new was that a judge could rule corruption on the face of the earth, which is a death sentence for hijab. And there were supposed to be sanctions in workplaces and economical sanctions. And a lot of human rights organizations called the Islamic regime to cancel it. Even Pezeshkian said it shouldn't be implemented, but it was It was the Supreme Council of National Security. And that's December. That's when all the people who were like the heads of the security system were alive.
So let me ask, because these phrases, for people who don't follow Iran, corruption on the face of the earth, even supreme leader, these are very sort of messianic, almost cinematic, filmic kind of words. And I think that a lot of people in the West who are just discovering Iran would do well to hear from you, someone who's a linguistic and cultural expert. Explain to Western viewers how Iranian culture under the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the Islamic Revolution regime is drastically different from what we as Westerners know.
Maybe it's time to say my most important sentence. Iran is not an enemy of Israel, or for our viewers of the West. Iran and Israel have a common enemy named the Islamic Republic. And more than the Islamic Republic is an enemy of Israel, it is an enemy of Iran. Iran has what I call the identity pendulum, because on one hand, they're an ancient nation with long civilization, very rich civilization. They had two huge empires before Muhammad was even born. Even three, if you count the Parthian Empire, which didn't leave as much effect, but the Achaemenid Empire, from which we know Cyrus the Great is the biggest, and the Sasanian Empire was also a huge empire for over 400 years, just before the Islamic conquest. And so on one hand, they have this Iran, the name Iran, Aryanam in Old Persian, is the land of the Aryans, and Persian language is an Indo-European language. So this identity is ancient and Indo-European, West-facing. On the other hand, they have been Muslim for over 13 centuries. So they do have this sentiment. They've been worshipping the Islamic God. And up until the 19th century, national identity was not a thing. Your national identity was who you pay your taxes to and who you send your children to die in wars for. Not more than that. And in the 19th century, when national identity all over the world started, it was also the great discoveries of archaeology. And they realized that all these great kings that, by the way, they didn't know from the mythology, because mythology the first historical king in Iranian mythology is the last Achaemenid king. They didn't know, most of them didn't know Cyrus. 200 years ago. They didn't know Cyrus, they didn't know Darius the Great, they didn't know Xerxes. Only people who were very, very educated and read Arabic or Greek knew them. But suddenly they see that all these great kings were true. All these archaeological findings, deciphering Persian cuneiform, and it also makes them proud of their heritage. So there's this pendulum of identities between the Iranian, Aryan, Indo-European identity, which goes back a long time and faces the West, and the Muslim identity. And every time the regime takes the pendulum to one place, the people take it to the other extreme. And the Shah was very secular, very open to the West, tried to reduce the status of clergy. And what happened was that the people became more Islamic, and they said, why are you doing this 2,500 year celebration for Cyrus the Great? We've been Muslim for more than 13 centuries. We want to be Muslim, and you're just wasting the people's money. And there was a real Islamic awakening. It's not just that the people overthrew the Shah and then the Islamists took control. There was an Islamic awakening, but the Islamic regime actually made the Shah's dream come true, because when the Islamic regime took the pendulum to the Islamic extreme, the people went to the other extreme, and now Iran is one of the most secular countries in the world. And unlike us, we're Jewish. I'm Jewish and secular. Okay, Judaism is part of my identity. They say, no, I'm not Muslim. I'm bidin. I don't have a religion. Why do you say I'm secular Muslim? I'm not Muslim, even if they were born to a Muslim family. And there are also surveys about this. I don't know to quote numbers now, but we can put in the text body if you want the link. But there really is like a landslide to the secular side to be proud of the Islamic heritage. Traffic jams before the tomb of Cyrus, on Cyrus Day, when the regime doesn't block the roads, because in the last few years it's been blocking the roads there on Cyrus Day. And I think after the next revolution, assuming that the next regime would be something that's never been tried in Iran, which is a government that's good for the people, maybe Iran will be the most secular country in the Middle East.
So let's ask you something a little bit left field, which is in Europe and in the UK, where I'm from, there are people who fear that this is happening to our societies, because you've explained how the revolution actually didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a sort of slide towards increasing Islam in society. Now, we're not Islamic societies, but there is definitely an increasing influence of Islam in Western Europe. And there is a fear that things have trickled in as a sort of default, whether it's people eating halal food in secular schools because it's easier for the school to deal with it and things like that. So do you think that fear is something that those in the West, and I hear it particularly from Iranians in exile from Iran, say, we experienced this once before, we ran away from it, and now we see in the UK something similar makes us very afraid?
Yes, they're allowed to say it. I'm not allowed to say it because I'm not or of Muslim descent. But there's a lot of fear among Iranians from the West becoming Islamic, from the Islamic conquest of the West. That was the first purpose of Islam, to conquer the world. And they're doing it through democracy, through liberalism. And one of my former students did her master's thesis on the question of why was the West enchanted with Khomeini? And one of the reasons was a post-colonial complex. We want to be so okay with people and not conquer them and allow everyone to have their identity that we forget that some of these identities that we allow to keep are not in line with liberal values.
So you've mentioned the deep history of Persia. And in fact, I want to talk a little bit about Jews and Persia, because as you said, Iran and Israel aren't enemies. And indeed, the Persians and the Jews aren't enemies. So I think lots of people at this moment, it's very scary. There are sirens often here, and we're hiding in bunkers and keeping away from the ballistic missiles from Iran.
Yes, and in Iran, they're running away from Tehran. We saw these traffic jams.
Right, advised to do so by the Israelis. And just to get that point in, Israel tries to warn civilians to leave those areas they're bombing, and Tehran aims for us here in places like this. But what I was going to ask is about that relationship between Jews and Iranians, Jews in Iran. There are still even a few Jews left in Iran.
It's the second biggest Jewish community in the Middle East.
It's not hard, though, is it?
It's between 9 and 25,000. There's no official statistic.
So tell me about those people. What are they doing? How do they live their lives? The Iranian regime often uses them as an example of their great pluralism and freedoms that they allow the Jews, which we obviously know is nonsense. But flesh it out for me.
It's nonsense and not nonsense. I call it propaganda hostages. They are hostages of the regime. On one hand, they're used for propaganda to say, see, we're not anti-Semitic, we're only anti-Zionist. They have a representative in parliament, even though they're much less than 1/290th of Iranian population. They do have a chair in parliament for the Jewish representative. They have freedom of occupation. They can make and use alcohol, even though it's forbidden for most of the citizens of the country. They have, of course, freedom of worship and all that. And that serves the regime to say, we're not anti-Semitic.
So it's window dressing, basically.
But on the other hand, it's not the other hand. On the other branch of using them as propaganda hostages, after October 7th, the Islamic regime tried to get Iranians to make... to show support for Gaza, to show support for Hamas, and to show hatred to Israel. When they asked football because we're in Britain, right? in a stadium to wave flags of Palestine. There were like 3 fans who waved flags of Palestine, and the whole stadium advised them where to shove it.
Yeah.
And it was so loud that the live broadcast was cut because they couldn't screen out the audience. Or when they tried to make a moment of silence before a football match, it was twice. Once for the people of Gaza, for the martyrs of Gaza, and once for the 7 IRGC officers killed in Damascus on April 1st, 2024. In both cases, they announced a moment of silence, and the whole stadium was whistles and screams and anything but silence.
And they're incredibly brave people to do that in this sort of tyrannical regime.
It puts them in danger, and still they do it. When they tried to fill a mosque with there was a conference named Gaza Mazlume Mohtadar, Gaza the mighty oppressed. And you see like 2 people here, 2 people there. It was really pitiful. But they did manage to fill a synagogue. Because when you come to the leader of the Jewish community and you tell him, gather your people and fill a synagogue in support of Gaza and against the Israeli regime, you don't have the option to say no. So the only prayer house that was full of people protesting against Israel and supporting Hamas was a synagogue. And the only community they could get to the streets and fill the frame, from one end of the frame to the other, was the Jewish community.
And then there are people like George Galloway, the politician in the UK, who are really, I would say, they often make the Iranian regime's case. They then go to Iran and show, here's a synagogue, here's what the Jews are doing. So in effect, this is how the regime is using the Jews to spread this message around the world.
Right. And they also signaled to Israel that the Jewish community is a hostage. After the October attack in between October 25th and 26th, Israel opened the skies of Iran for the first time. It did it again a few days ago. And it was very, very humiliating for the Islamic regime. And every time we see the Islamic regime is feeling or looking or afraid to be perceived as weak or flexible, we see a rise in executions.
Like now, we've just seen.
That we've seen in October, there were over 160 executions because it was a very humiliating month. Since they started the nuclear negotiations in April and May, there were more than 100 executions each. And I'm afraid to find out the statistics for June, because this month they're really weak. If there's no rise in the statistics for June, I would be very happy, because it means the regime is so weak, it can't even execute the prisoners. But I expect it to be maybe over 200. What I wanted to say about Jews is that there was a Jew who was sentenced to death in April or May. There was a big effort to try to save him all around the world. Saving him was either about retrial, because he said it was in self-defense and it wasn't checked, or about convincing the family of the victim to forgive him.
To pardon him, right.
Because they can pardon him for a lot of money, but they wanted revenge. And we couldn't get that, but he was executed? He was executed in early November, right after the Israeli attack. And I think it was a signal to Israel to say, we have hostages here. We have a few thousand hostages here.
I want to ask about the Green Revolution. We're thinking about 2009, and Obama effectively, many say, threw the Iranians under the bus, that he had the opportunity to support their uprising. Now we have Donald Trump, and we have Israel opening the skies, as you said, really showing its strength and the weakness of the regime in Iran.
You know what's the thing that made me happiest is there was an interview published in Ynet yesterday with a pilot from the first wave of attacks. And he said that when they approached Iran, they saw Iranian fighter jets taking off and running away.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very, very encouraging. So you were saying about the
Yes, so I know that you were saying to me before we started that Israel should encourage the Iranian people less, or not at all. And yet what we're seeing is this constant question from Western media interviewers, are you after regime change? Are you after regime change? Now, they're stopping short of saying yes, but they're not really doing a very good job of disguising their enormous excitement at the prospect. So why do you think it's a good idea that Israel should stop talking about that?
Okay, first I want to put things in place because the 2009 uprising was about the results of the elections for the president. The president is the head of the executive branch. He doesn't make the decisions like in the US. He executes orders. He does what he's told. He implements the policy dictated to him from above. And the elections in 2009 were about, I voted for Mossavi to implement the policy of the Islamic Republic, and I got Ahmadinejad. Okay, so it's still
does it make a difference to them though?
Right, it's still inside the system. In 2022, it was about overthrowing the Islamic regime. It wasn't only about hijab. If it were only about hijab, there would be no protests anymore because women stopped wearing hijab.
But this is when we saw women cutting their hair, taking off their hijab.
Right, because hijab and hair is something that's very visible, and it's a good symbol to protest by and to oppress with.
So sorry to jump in. So 2009, we saw the complaint about we got the wrong henchman. In 2022, we hate what you're doing to us. So maybe 2025, it's the moment where it becomes terminal for
right.
Asian.
So the comparison should be to 2022 and not to 2000.
But it's a progression, effectively.
Right. The regime is weak now. It's been weak since Assad fell, and it's of course very weak now when everyone in the top command of the armed forces, except Abdulrahim Mousavi, who's still alive, and I wish him longevity. Can I say why I wish him longevity?
Go for it.
He's the best looking person in the security system in Iran.
I think Ahmadinejad was quite hot too. I mean, people used to constantly tell me I looked like him. So, I thought him and Jake Gyllenhaal, depending on whether it was a good day or a bad one. But well, joking aside, Persians, among many other things, are very sophisticated, beautiful, elegant people. So this is yet another element of why.
And a lot of Iranian men with full hair.
Yeah, I know. I'm jealous. So to go back to the idea of overthrowing the regime.
So now there's an opportunity. Okay, the regime is the weakest it's been. There's hardly any security system. The head of all the forces and the head of the commander of the IRGC and the commander of the IRGC Air and Space Force and the commander of IRGC operations and the commander of IRGC intelligence are down.
And one replacement.
They were promoted to Shahid. They have been replaced. Okay.
But Israel has even now killed, I believe, at least one replacement.
Yes. It's like fast track to Shahid.
So when you say that, though, you're half joking, but you're saying that in a way it's a promotion. So are you against all of these targeted assassinations, or just the supreme leader?
Just the supreme leader, because I don't mind them becoming shaheeds. Okay, because assassinating them means that the people who are now they have been replaced very fast. But you need to learn. You need, when you get into a new job and such an important post, you need to understand how to do it. You need to learn it, and they don't have people to teach them. They don't have, usually you have some overlap.
So isn't there a risk though in that sense that if the regime doesn't fall, what you're left with is actually a lot of neophytes, people who really don't have a clue what they're doing, might just be stupid, harsher, tougher, and actually this could make things potentially worse for the Iranians.
Right. This is why I think Khamenei should not be eliminated, because a new leader might help them rise from the ashes. And also, if we go for a ceasefire now, I think the Iranian people would see it as betrayal by the West if we now help the regime survive. But we were talking about, I don't think we should encourage them to go to the streets because they know, if you encourage me to, work out more or attend to my business more. You tell me what I should do, and I know I should do it. It only creates antagonism. They know. And the other thing is that if they do go to the streets and something backfires, Israel would be to blame. Iranians suffer from something that I call nofuzophobia. Nofuz means influence and penetration, like the foreign powers meddling with Iranian affairs. It's been there for a few centuries now. The first revolt, actually, the tobacco revolt, was because the whole of Iran's tobacco market was sold into British hands, and all Iranians quit smoking in 1 week. That was in the late 19th century.
So the British did something good, huh?
No, they went back to smoking after the tobacco market went back to Iranian hands, because the fatwa, the religious command, was that tobacco that went through non-Muslim hands is haram. They're smart. And it was in the 19th century, so, but what I want to say is that Iranians don't like other powers meddling with their affairs. There was also the Mossadegh overthrow in 1953 that Iranians blamed for this coup. They blamed America, they blamed the UK, and of course the powers said it wasn't us, it was a spontaneous coup, but the CIA documents are only confidential for 60 years. And in 2013, when the archives were open, it was revealed that, yes, it was the job of the United States. So we shouldn't meddle with them. It's okay. It's more than okay that we promote all these people to shaheed, and that we weaken the regime. And of course, that we target nuclear and missile targets that threaten our existence. But the people need an organic, authentic spark. They need an opportunity. Doesn't bring people to the streets. What brings people to the streets is authentic rage. And I don't know how to create it. I don't think we should create it. I think the regime should make some mistake. And there are a few words for mistake in Persian. I think they should make a galat, which is a very, very bad and very pejorative mistake. They only need to do one thing that would be a spark that would send people to the streets. It shouldn't be something that Israel does, or the West, or anyone else. I don't know what it will be, because what brought them to the streets in 2022, Mahsa Amini's death, in 2023, September 2023, the same scenario, a girl walking without hijab, getting in a fight with someone from the hijab watch, falling down, hitting her head, losing consciousness. But they learned how to handle the situation and nothing happened. So it won't be a girl going without hijab and getting killed. I don't know what it will be. Because I don't like bloodshed. I think it's best if it would be in the summer. They're expected a few days with no electricity, no water, and no internet. No internet, not because of the regime, but because there will be no electricity and no internet infrastructure. So that might bring people to the streets, because when you can't protest in the internet, you will have to protest in the real world.
Well, that's happening now. I mean, I've seen that there have been internet outages. Obviously, Israel has been also targeting, to some extent, fuel, I think, oil, though not extensively. Mm-hmm. So in a way, Israel is playing its part. But what I think you're saying is hope and pray, but don't say it. Don't encourage it overtly and externally. It's even okay to express your hope, but not to encourage them. We have to remember that the Iranian people are our allies, not our tools. Yeah.
Okay. We have to.
Which is a difference between how perhaps the West and Israel should act, not to use them as proxies, and how the Islamic Republic acts, which is it has these client proxies, and they demand and they provide, but they demand in return.
Right. We should hope in return. I think they know they should do it. They know that this is what they want to do. They've been oppressed for 46 years. Most people in Iran want to overthrow this regime. I'm usually very careful, but I think that it's a real majority.
When you say most, what sort of percentage would you put it? I've heard so many estimates.
I don't know. I don't have an estimate. I just know what I saw after October 7th, that the regime couldn't do anything, couldn't get Muslims to the streets and to the mosques to protest against Israel. And protesting against Israel or expressing support of Israel is not about Israel. It's about the regime. Okay? If you support or oppose the regime, because Israel is like, my enemy's enemy.
Let me ask you a bit about this hostage taking, because this is another hallmark of the Islamic Republic. And there are, for example, British hostages who've been kept by them. At the moment, there's even a couple, Craig and Lindsay Foreman, who were taken. They were, I believe, tourists on a biking trip through Iran. We had in the past Nazanin Zaghari Radcliffe, whose husband made her case very high profile. But generally, even those who are there now, the UK never talks about them. People get kidnapped, arrested on bogus charges, have these show trials, and then tortured and even killed in prison, like Jimmy Sharmad, the German-American. What is Iran doing when it takes these people? It seems such an outrageous abuse of international order, and yet the West seems to be absolutely impotent in the face of it. How are they managing to wield this power in such a brutal, medieval, horrible way and get away with it?
I assume it's also part of the post-colonialist complex. Like we don't want to tell these noble people what to do because they know but I'm an Iran expert, so I can tell you what the IRGC did and why there was a rise in arrests of especially dual nationals. After the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA in 2015, Iran was allegedly open to foreign investments. But the IRGC, during the years of sanctions, became, besides being a military and security power, it also became an economic power. And when you become such a great economic power, you don't want other players in your field. And the arrests of dual nationals after the JCPOA more than doubled. Maybe to signify to investors from the West, you don't really want to mess with us. And that was part of it. Specifically about the UK, it's also because when the tobacco, after the tobacco revolt, Iran remained with a great debt to the British kingdom, and they don't want to pay it. I think the debt is still there. They're still supposed to pay it. They won't.
Well, that was even with Nazanin. That was one of the things that, in the end, effectively, the UK repaid a historic debt in order to get her back. And it was effectively blackmail, but it was a debt that was owed. Yeah. So I think that one of the things that people do note is that the Iranians, the Islamic Republic, are very shrewd. I often hear people say that it's a mistake to treat them as rational actors. But actually, I think they are very rational in pursuit of an irrational goal. And that's perhaps what we in the West
fanatic,
understand.
But they're not stupid.
So let's tackle this idea of the fanatical goal, or what I called irrational. Let's talk about 12 Shia Islam. Can you explain exactly what that is and how that really dictates how the Islamic Republic rules both internally and externally?
The 12er Imam Shia there are two major branches of Islam. Each one of them has further branches. The ones who believe that after Muhammad's death, the prophecy or the leadership of the Islamic world should have been by blood, and some who believe it should have been by skills. That's the difference between Shia and Sunna. Okay, for more than 300 centuries, or about 13 centuries, that's the thing. If it's Ali, who was kinsman, or Abu Bakr, who was, the most skilled. That's the thing, and this is why they kill each other all the time. Iran was Sunni until the 16th century, when 14-year-old Shah Ismail I made it Shiite for political reasons. And Shiite Islam was the minority for until Iran became Shiite, and they still have some minority mentality. Like they always think that everyone is against them, but they do things that make people against them. So it's like a prophecy a self-fulfilling prophecy. And they're allowed to lie. The problem with negotiating with Shiites is that they have a religious permission to lie if you're in danger, but they're always in danger.
So this is something I wrote in a recent column, which is perhaps what Western diplomats misunderstand. They can be masters of Western diplomacy in the negotiations in the JCPOA, but back home, they're completely different and speaking in a kind of apocalyptic, messianic way.
Yes, and what I think the negotiators should understand, I always say, more than we need diplomats or strategists or politicians in this negotiation, we need a psychologist, because what motivates the Iranians is not what motivates the West.
What does motivate them?
Honor and survival. They need a ladder to climb down this tree that they came.
But Obama offered them that, no?
What?
Obama offered them that.
I don't remember exactly what they were offered, but let's talk about now. Okay. Khamenei said we won't negotiate at all in April. And then he was offered a letter when Trump sent him just a letter. And then it was just a letter back. So, and then they called it مذاكرات غير مستقيم, indirect negotiations. And so that was okay.
And that's when Trump called it direct. And there was even a little bit of tension there because
right. And then
it was a question of honor.
For them, it's direct. For us, it's indirect because we sit on two sides of the same table, but we don't talk to them. We talk to the translator, or we don't look them in the eye. You know, they're trying to, because if the supreme leader says, then even if before Pezeshkian said we should negotiate, the moment the supreme leader says something, everyone should.
And when Trump plays this game, a lot of people say, oh, he's an idiot, he's a bull in a china shop. But actually, isn't he being very clever? Because he's giving them the honor with the letter, but here and there, he's taking a bit away and saying they're talking to us directly, he tells the world. And it seems that the negotiations actually, maybe Trump's the psychologist.
No, but also he said if we don't reach an agreement in 2 months, something very bad will happen. They said, we don't negotiate with people who threaten us. Also, Khamenei,
Though now they're saying, oh, we'd like to negotiate again.
Yes, because they have to give up their honor for their survival.
So here we are, honor, survival, psychology, Trump, ancient Persian culture, Islamic revolution. We're in this moment of enormous, enormous fear, but also enormous promise. And whether it's through the negotiations leading to this moment of war and warfare, or whether it's through an uprising of the Iranian people, you're an expert. You know the language, you know the culture. I'm not asking you to use your crystal ball, but let's say the regime does fall, as seems very possible. What do you hope and what do you think, two different things, will replace it? Could it just be like in Syria, new boss, same score?
One of the fears of the Iranian people have two major fears about the day after. One is that Iran will separate into its different components, because Iran has a lot of different ethnic groups and some of them are separatists. So this is one fear. And the other fear is that the West would bring someone of their choice to rule them. Until about 2 years ago, they were afraid that the West would bring the Mujahideen Khalq to rule Iran, because the West sort of supported the Mujahideen Khalq, which is considered a terrorist organization. They were very active in the 1979 revolution, but they understood very fast what's happening. They understood very fast that Khomeini is taking the country in the wrong direction, and they opposed the Islamic regime. But in the Iran-Iraq war, they supported Saddam. And because they supported Saddam, they're considered the enemy. They're also communist. They have a shadow government with a president, but the president covers her head and changed her last name to her husband's last name. That's not something a free Iranian woman would do. Iranian women don't change their name. And we don't want another religious communist government now. So that was one fear. I think it was alleviated in 2023 when Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince, started his democratic movement. The movement dispersed since then, but he has, I think, the largest consensus. There's no one candidate, no one future leader that has support from everyone, But I think Reza Pahlavi has the most support. He also has, he's a symbol. He says he doesn't want to rule, but he just wants to help bring Iran from the present dictatorship to the future democracy without the chaos that usually ensues after overthrowing a dictatorship. And we all saw what happened in the Middle East after the Arab Spring. We got things that are a lot worse. So they see it and they know it. And the next government that they want is not extreme, not secular coercion and not religious coercion. They want people to wear what they want, to have freedom of speech, to have all their freedoms. And I don't remember if I said it here or in another place. Something that's never been tried in Iran is a government that's actually good for the people. So that's what I hope for Iran. And I do hope that Reza Pahlavi will really take Iran this short way and then let it stabilize. I don't know how skilled he is to be a ruler, but what's important now is the support.
So I've known many Persians, many Iranians who do seem to gravitate around him as a figurehead, Reza Pahlavi, and I also have heard concerns that maybe that role is one that he likes, but maybe the actual reality of returning after the downfall of the regime is a poison chalice and something that maybe he wouldn't want or wouldn't cope with. And so isn't that really the key to all of this, which is if it's brought down, the Islamic Republic could be replaced by something worse or a series of things that are much worse. Better the devil you know than the devil you don't, just without nukes?
That was also, one of the fears was that we don't know what's in the day after. And after the Arab Spring, there were a few years of less protests because they saw that, oh, wow, it can get worse. In 1979, the Shah was not overthrown because he was good. He was overthrown because he was bad. They just didn't realize it could be so much worse. And after the Arab Spring, when they started to see ISIS and, the other things that filled the vacuum, they realized it could be much worse. And they stopped for a little bit. I did say we shouldn't meddle with their things. Maybe Reza Pahlavi would need some support from the West. Right now, he is the person in the West. He had speeches in all the parliaments in Europe. He was invited to the Munich Conference of Security, I think it's called. It's a conference of heads of state. He was invited as the Iranian representative in 2023 and not the Islamic Republic. So he does have the support. He does talk about we have to do it this time on our own and not with foreign governments. I really don't know if he will be the right person. I hope he will have enough good advisors and good willing advisors to really help him bring Iran to a better place. I'm dying to go there already.
Me too. I have to tell you.
I'm Israel's first cultural attaché in Free Iran.
Well, if you can, bring me with, because I know so many Iranians who have told me so much about the place that I'm desperate to go, but right now I definitely wouldn't. I want to know a bit more in that vein about Persian culture, of which I know you're also an expert. So how much has this 46 years of the Islamic Revolution rule and also the Islamization before erased perhaps what some romantically now hope will have this sudden rebirth? If everything changes, we're not going to suddenly see, gay pride Tehran like was meant to be here in Tel Aviv last week.
Iran, even present-day Iran, is very homophobic. The society is more homophobic than the government. Society is more dangerous than the regime. If you, for example, if you're 18-year-old and have to go to the army and you go and declare that you're homosexual, and the hard thing is that you have to bring a relative who knows, because most of them are deep in the closet. But if you bring one relative who knows, you get exempt from military service, and they don't do anything. They don't do anything for your sexual orientation. There's no punishment for that, only for the act. But to prove the act, you need four witnesses who say the same. It's impossible. It's impossible. So we don't see executions for homosexuality. If they do want, they can always say they raped, because there is
the
a death
executions we've
sentence
seen
for rape, and
okay.
there's death sentence for drug offenses. So
but there is also for sodomy, isn't there?
Yes, but
you have to witness it for, okay. So again, another thing actually, while we're on the subject of homosexuality, one of the things I've heard is that under this regime, they will permit you to be transsexual or transgender, but not to be homosexual. So they encourage this surgery. Is that correct?
Yes, they encourage sex change operation. They even convince people who don't know enough. I saw a BBC documentary. There was one person who said that the psychologist told me that I'm 98% woman and 2% men, and this operation will help me be complete. And only when he woke up, he realized what was done to him.
Sounds like some of the West these days.
No, but it's really, they convince cisgender people to have a sex change operation. This is not, I don't say it's a gender affirming surgery. It's really sex change.
By force, by compulsion, really.
By compulsion. There are families who tell their sons, either you have a sex change operations or we kill you. There's actually a refugee organization in Turkey that's about people who were faced with this choice. So society is much, much more dangerous than the regime in this respect.
And that's really surprising to me, because we are sort of led to believe that there is this, we have all those photos that do the rounds every so often, and videos of Iran in the 70s, and we see women in bikinis and things like that. And the women life freedom movement was all about sort of female liberation. But what you're saying is, at least when it comes to homosexuality, is it the same with women and gender and other elements of society? Is it actually not a liberal society, even if we take away this layer of tyranny, of Islamic tyranny at the top?
It's not a liberal society like Israel or like the UK or like the US. There was a research in 2011 by 3 BA students, Yuval Porat, Gallin, and Yael Stern, who tried to, after the Arab Spring that turned into a very, very depressing winter, they said, okay, so is Iran ready for democracy? Is Iran up for democracy? Maybe they can't handle it like the Egyptians couldn't handle it. And because you can't just ask people if they're for pro-democracy, because they will be afraid to answer the right answer, and nobody knows what democracy really is. What they did is they took a value questionnaire to see the values of society. It's a questionnaire that was done, if I remember correctly, by Professor Shalom Schwartz from the Hebrew University. I hope I remember all the names correctly. It was done in over 100 countries throughout the world, and I was part of the translating team. So they did the same questionnaire on Iranians and checked the values of society, and they made an index of these values to see how liberal society is. And they checked it against the Freedom House Index of Liberal Democracy. And they saw that there was really, you could see a line, and all the countries in the world except Iran and China are one standard deviation from this line, within one standard deviation. Iran was much below. So Iran doesn't have the value system to be Switzerland or to be Norway or to be Sweden, but it certainly has the values to have the same freedoms as 2011 Poland or Czech Republic.
And to what extent is that a result of decades of imposed extreme conservatism in an Islamic vein? And to what extent is that actually the natural tendency of the Persian population? It's
the natural tendency because it was also there during the Shah's time.
And so those images that I see circulate on the internet that looks like the swinging 60s, is that just an anomaly?
When you saw these pictures of the swinging 60s, you saw, it was what they wore. There was a woman minister. Okay. There are now Iranian women now, because of the oppression, when they get out of Iran and shed all their,
I know some,
all their chains, they become much more successful than the men, because the men are used to being just given what they want, and the women have to fight for their place. This is also why we see more women fighting in these protests.
Right.
But it's not coincidental that the two Nobel Prizes of Iran and the only Fields Medal of Iran, Fields Medal is like Nobel Prize for mathematics, and the best, the most successful Iranian author and the most successful Iranian actor is actually an actress. They're all women because they're used to fight. They're used to fighting. And a lot of the men, when immigrating, break down. And it's the women who hold the house, because now I'll refer to a book that's in Hebrew but is being translated to English as we speak. It's a book about Jewish Eastern Europe. And in the last chapter, the author, Shalom Boguslavsky, says that Superman is a very Jewish story, because once you don't have, Krypton's gravity, and when you have more sun, you have superpowers just because you don't have all these boundaries that were imposed on Eastern European Jews. This is why they became so successful when they immigrated to the West. The same as with Iranian women. I see the same with Iranian women.
The Superman actually is a Jewish story, because he was found in this basket, and I believe it was written by Jews.
And he and his father have Hebrew names.
Yeah, Kalel. So I actually think it was designed as a... Sorry for the geek fact to intervene there. Now, I want to ask, though, you mentioned Superman, but I also know that there's a big movement of Persian, Iranian art and culture, especially in the diaspora. I watched a wonderful film just recently called My Favorite Cake from 2024. And it showed this, I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's beautiful. It showed this very sweet story of an elderly lady whose husband had died some years before, and her sort of interest in romance and the difficulties for her to even engage in friendship or romance with a man. And I won't spoil the film. I really do recommend it. But it showed sort of day-to-day life in modern day Iran in a way that was chilling, because it was the little things that really seemed to get in the way. She wasn't trying to be women's lib. She was just trying to be a normal woman to engage in a very wholesome sort of moment in her older age. And that's why it's very interesting to see that Iranians are still making this kind of art. Can you tell me, how are Iranians using art and culture to express what maybe has been suppressed for decades? And how much are they able to do that? Will there be also an explosion of that potentially after the downfall of the regime?
What caused the explosion of freedom of expression was the internet. Because up until the internet, if you wanted to publish, it's still like that, but the internet just is a bypass. If you wanted to publish a book, to make a movie, to make a play or a record or any work of art, you needed a license from the Ministry of Islamic Guidance.
Wow.
And for example, in the movie The Agent, you see that they have a play that's supposed to include nudity, but she's wearing a coat. And they're even joking about it, because this movie did get a license. It's a movie about a play, among other things. So they do find ways like to bypass, but since the internet, you don't need a license to bring your music everywhere. You can just, put it on Spotify or on CD Baby or any other music website on YouTube, and you don't need the permission of the regime. So I think in the field of art, we're already there. Maybe people who are inside Iran would be less afraid for their life. But in terms of licensing, we do hear voices, and we do see. And some of the protests for people who are inside and afraid for their lives is sublime. Like, you protest for something else, you disguise it, you talk about fairies instead of talking about women.
But what's the cultural memory like? For example, Zoroastrianism or Nowaz? I mean, how do these things survive through the decades?
There are still Zoroastrians in Iran, and Iranians think that they still uphold Zoroastrian traditions, which they don't exactly do. Nowruz, the favorite holidays, Nowruz, Yalda, are holidays that are Iranian and not Islamic. and they're beloved holidays, and they do keep traditions that are very beautiful. But for example, before Nowruz, the Tuesday night, which is called Saturday, it's called Wednesday because the day begins on sunset, is called Fiery Wednesday or Red Wednesday. And you jump over fires, and then you tell them, take my yellow and give me your red, which means take my disease and give me your health. And they think they're upholding the Zoroastrian tradition, but Zoroastrians are appalled by this because you jump over fire, you can pollute it. If you have a hair falling to the fire, it pollutes the fire. Or you can defile it with the dust from your feet. And you insult the fire. You wish it bad. It's not a Zoroastrian thing, but they think
they're kind of like Marranos, like crypto Jews who, after the Spanish Inquisition, for generations kept traditions, but they got so diluted or warped that it didn't really mean anything.
There were a lot of traditions that were changed after the Islamic conquest to show that no, we're not upholding Zoroastrian traditions. With the generations, these became the traditions that people think are Zoroastrian. There are Zoroastrians in Iran. They do have a seat in parliament, even though they're a minority. They have freedom of worship. They have you can't build a Sunni mosque in Tehran, but you can. It would be easier to get a license to build a fire temple, a Zoroastrian fire temple, than a Sunni mosque.
Interesting. I want to ask you about Zionism in contrast with modern Persian identity then. So both seem to be a reaction against a sort of identity revolution, let's say, against something. Are there some similarities? And is that why there are these bonds that we see today between some Iranians and some Jews, Israeli Zionists, do you think?
I think there's a lot of very similar things. And I think we're now, unfortunately, undergoing a process that Iran went through in the 70s and 80s. Zionism was based on secularism. It's a very secular movement. And we in the beginning, it was about agriculture and about the land. And there was some secular coercion, not as much as the Shah, but seculars were the mainstream. And now we're going to the other extreme of Messianic Judaism. And it's not a path that I like. A lot of things that are happening in Israel now are too reminiscent of things that happened in Iran in the 70s and 80s.
As somebody that has such a passion for Iranian and Persian culture, you're quite rare as well in being an expert in all of this. How painful is it for you to see something you clearly love so much being so downtrodden, punished, tortured by such a horrible regime?
Every time someone is killed, or during the 2022-2023 protests, on one hand, each person killed there breaks my heart. Especially there were a lot of young girls who had TikTok and YouTube channels, and after their death, you can see who she was. So it's heartbreaking. Or 9-year-old Kiana Pirfarak, who was killed by security by mistake. He wasn't protesting; he was just with his parents in the way. So that's heartbreaking. But on the other hand, every such protests gives me hope that maybe now that would be the real thing. And right now we don't have protests yet, but I think in the next protests it's very likely that it would be the real thing.
Do you think it's days, weeks, or months away?
I'm trying to be careful. I always say I don't know if it will be tomorrow, next week, or in 50 years, but I think it's much closer. But it really depends if the West extends like a safety rope to the Islamic regime, because if you negotiate with them now for a ceasefire, it might save the regime, and that might cause continued depression of the people of Iran. So I'm usually very, very pacifistic and no war, but I think the job should be finished.
So to be just a little political as we come to the end, Donald Trump seems to be, so far, going along with what's happening. And Israel seems to be fulfilling the multi-decade vision of Benjamin Netanyahu in relation to Iran. He's chickened out, many say, many times over, but now this is it for whatever reason. You said you're against war, but is this what it needed? And are these the people who needed to make it happen?
I guess that's what was needed. I don't know if other people would have done the same. Maybe they would. I give credit to the Israeli Air Force, to the Israeli army, to, there are a lot of people who did this job. It's not just one person. I do think that maybe Bibi did it to postpone his trial. There are a lot of voices that say, that the timing is about the trial. On the other hand, because we have the support of a lot of countries in Europe that are usually not very supportive of Israel, I think maybe there was some intelligence that I'm not exposed to that said that, yes, this is the money time. This is the time it should have been done. And once we started, it should go to the end.
Well, you've said that Persian identity is older than Islam and stronger than fear, I believe. So let's hope that this, for the people of Iran as much as for the people of Israel where we are now, that this is a turning point for good. And in the meantime, thank you very, very much for all of your insights here and ongoing. I know that people can follow you on TikTok in particular. Where else can people find your work and keep abreast of what you're telling us?
TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And I'm about to launch an English channel.
Thanks again for speaking with me today.
Thank you.